Hello everybody, welcome to our lecture. Today we're going to be talking about web application exploitation with injection. To just kind of outline what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be focusing on SQL injection, as does the chapter. We'll look a little bit at SQL and then how, the anatomy of a very basic SQL injection. So, introductory level course, okay, I just want to give you some insight into what's happening. I'm not expecting you to understand fully or really be SQL masters or really even be able to write your own queries. The lab we'll talk about here towards the end of the lecture is just, essentially follow along in the book and execute the commands, type the commands as they are provided. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. If you want to get more advanced, then by all means, this is a great place to start. With that then, I want to take a look at the IA lab. So if you haven't used our information assurance lab before, I'll just demo that quick and show you how to get in, and then show you the VM that I have set up for everybody based off of our Backtrack 5 VM, and something that you can use instead of using your own local setup. So I could have provided that right off the bat at the beginning of the semester, but I wanted to make sure that everybody has gone through the process of installing virtualization software, namely VMware Player, at least once natively on their machines, open up their own VMs and seeing how that process works. Because when you start using our iLab, it's a great tool. And it's all browser based, so you don't really understand exactly what's going on behind the scenes. So that's why I did that. So we'll take a look at that, and then I want to point out a few things in the lab inside of that virtual machine, inside of our IA lab, just to make sure you guys don't run into any issues there. So to get started then, one more thing. Additionally, I have also, there's a video, I'll provide you guys the link in a news item on the D2L website, a video covering SQL map. Okay, this is something that I produced. You can see on the upload date here, it's a little dated, it's about 3 years old, but that's okay, because as the author points out in the book, SQL injection has been around for quite a while. SQL map is a tool that has been around for quite a while as well. And while this version that we're looking at is obviously going to be a little dated, it's still all the same concept. So the lab doesn't use SQL map. There is a coverage in the book, a page or 2 or 3 about SQL map, and then there's also this additional lecture you can watch if you're interested in learning a little bit more about SQL map and seeing it work in action, instead of just reading it and looking at screen captures. So I'll provide you that link so you can take a look at that. All right, before we begin, actually, to begin, I want to talk a little bit about databases. So databases are just software that allows us to store information, to store it, to organize it, and then to create relationships with it. When we're looking at software, okay, the web server that we've installed and have running in our Backtrack Backtrack VM, that's a piece of software. It's a piece of software that does a specific thing. Database servers are no different. They're software that do a specific thing. There are a lot of different database server engines out there. 2 of the most popular will be MySQL, MySQL, and SQL Server. MySQL is free, open source. It's supported and developed, actively maintained by Oracle. SQL Server is developed, designed, maintained, implemented by Microsoft. Okay, we don't need to get into the differences between the 2. Just know that these are kind of the 2 more popular ones that you're going to see. We're using MySQL. MySQL is free, it's open source, and that's why we're using it. And that's why a lot of people choose to use it. Okay, there are some differences in between the 2 database systems and the other ones that are available, but again, we don't need to worry about that. So when we look at the application, and let's just kind of talk through the login process. So every time you open up DVWA, you're provided with a login script or a login screen. You enter in your username, you enter in your password, you click submit, and what that does then is that sends from your browser to that web server that information. In this case, your username and a password. From there, the application takes that information and it says, okay, I just got a login request to the application. Here are the values that this user supplied me. He supplied me with a username, whatever the value is, and a password, whatever that value is. Because most websites store this information inside of a database, then the application takes that information, it constructs an SQL query, and it sends that to the SQL server. Okay, the server then processes that SQL and it returns the results. The results that are returned get returned back to the application. The application looks at those results and says, okay, you found a positive result. You found a record that matches that username and password. Great, I can allow this user in. You did not find the results. Okay, I cannot let the user in. So then the application makes a decision, makes a branch in its logic based off of the results that were returned. and then you, as the end user, you see that result. Either you see login incorrect, or you get redirected to the page, the home page, or whatever page is the default that the application drops you to. So that's the basic process. Okay, the application, the thing that we need to focus on for this chapter is that the application is taking this information and it's crafting SQL. Now we're going to pick on and look at SQL injection, and the one reason is because it's very prevalent still. SQL injection is still very prevalent. It's still going to be one of those top vulnerabilities that a lot of applications suffer. It's been around for a long time, and but bigger picture, what you can look at is that even though we are we're picking on SQL injection and SQL, this is kind of the basis. The process that we're going to go through is the basis for all command injection. Okay, OS command injection, LDAP, XML, you name it. It's the same process. We have to understand the underlying syntax, the underlying structure of the data, the format that we're using. We have to understand how that application interacts with underlying operating systems or other software, other services, and then figure out if we can find vulnerabilities in it. All right, so we're going to do that looking at SQL. We're going to look at SQL. We're going to look at how applications can build a query based off of the values you provided, how that query gets executed against the database, and then how we can leverage that process, the weaknesses in how the developer coded it, to exploit it. So with the database then, what we're looking at here, you're looking at a tool called MySQL Workbench. And this is just a GUI that allows us to interact with a database server. Okay, so that database server that I was talking about, again, it's a piece of software. It's running, and we have multiple ways we can interact with it. One is through this GUI. Each server then can have a number of databases itself. Okay, and if the best analogy I can come up with is if you think about shared hosting. Okay, oftentimes companies like GoDaddy, they're going to provide really cheap hosting because they dump a whole bunch of people on one server. One web server with one database server. But then inside that database server, they have multiple databases. So let's say that you and I both set up our own independent separate websites, but we happen to be on the same server, the same shared hosting at GoDaddy. We would both then have a database inside of that database server, one for your application and one for mine. Okay, same server, different databases. And it's very similar with what we have set up with the DVWA. What that script does is it creates a database in that database server called DVWA. Okay, a lot of this then is just how we logically organize things. There's reasons why we have databases that are only contain certain information. Oftentimes they're associated with certain applications. So this is just a tool. Again, this is just a tool that allows us to graphically interact with a database server. You can see here I have a schemas tab, and this is a free and open source tool. Okay, so if you're interested in it, by all means download it and play around with it. It's a great tool. Schemas just mean your database. But how many databases, how many tables, how many columns, everything that we want to look at in a database. That's what a schema is. It's just a short word, a one-word way of explaining that or expressing that. So here you can see that this is in here. We have 4 schemas, 4 databases, and DVWA is one. Okay, so I created one loosely based off of the DVWA database. This isn't exact, so if you're following along, looking at the actual DVWA database, this isn't exact, but it's very close. Databases then, if you select a single database, inside of a database there's tables. And the analogy I can come up with this is at the simplest terms. When you're just getting used to, if you haven't done anything with database servers and SQL, think of it like a spreadsheet. Think of the database itself like the book, and then the tables like the individual sheets. And each sheet then is going to have its own information in it. You're going to have probably one row that's your column headers that explains what's inside the database or what's inside that sheet, and then every row after that is the actual data. Right? So that's what a table is inside of a database. So you can see here, if we select tables, don't worry about any of this other stuff. Tables, we have one table called users. Okay, so if we find a users table, odds are we have users inside of that. And when we're trying to exploit an application to get a different user login, then this is a pretty good place to look. All right, inside of that table, the thing we care about are columns. Okay, columns are like the columns in the spreadsheet. What is the data inside this table? Well, we have an ID column, a name column, a username, and a password column. We don't care about the ID column, but we do care about probably name. We definitely care about username and password. So how do we interact with all this data? Well, we have to write SQL. This is a window that just allows me to write whatever SQL I want. When you highlight something, then that executes only that SQL. So let's highlight this first word, or this first statement, and you'll see it's select star from users. So what that is doing is it's going to select every column. This is the portion of a statement to specify the columns that you want. If you just want all columns, you put a star. So select star from users. That means select everything, every column, and every record from the users table. So we execute that, and down here is the output, and it looks, similar to a spreadsheet. Here's my column headers, ID, name, username, password, and then here is the actual data inside of that. Okay, so I have some names, some usernames, and some passwords. So let's add this other statement into what we're looking at. Okay, and this is a very simplistic, very basic way of looking at how an application might structure its SQL in order to authenticate somebody. So we add from our select from users a where clause. Okay, we obviously use where. And what where does is it allows us to filter. If you are trying to log in, I need to find one result, one record that matches what you provided me. So we can break this where clause by filters. And we can say where username equals some value and where password equals some value. All right, that's the information that you provided me. So now as the application programmer, I take that information and I concatenate it, I build it into this statement, and then I send the statement off to the SQL server and it runs it for me. So let's say that you did provide me with admin and password. I run that statement. Okay, we got an error, nothing happened here. Okay, I have admin highlighted, and I just got done saying that when you highlight something and try to execute it, it'll execute just that. Well, admin means nothing, so I need to make sure I haven't highlighted anything. Now we'll run it, and you see we got a result. Okay, user admin with a password. So if this was running in the application, then this would come back to the application itself. We had one result, and now it can take that result and do what it needs to do. In this case, allow you access to the program. Let's say I change one values. Okay, think of this as a logical end. Username and password have to match. So if I change the password to something that we know is not correct, I get no results. These are null values. That means I didn't get anything back. Okay, let's change it back to password. We'll execute. And now let's say that I provided the wrong username. Okay, again, no results. They both have to be correct in order to execute. So I'm going to break this query down a little bit. We can, with the SQL Editor, using MySQL Workbench, you can have multiple lines. So I'm just going to break this into multiple lines just so we can look at it. If I execute it, it still executes just fine. And what you'll see here is that, anytime we talk about in the book, where he talks about kind of highlighting out in that, different font, the payloads, or what are the values that you should type into the application in order to try to trigger this SQL injection, this is where it's coming into. So I'm talking about those payloads in the book coming into the application, becoming a part of an SQL statement, very similar to this, and then being sent to the SQL server. So one of the first ones he has you type, and I'm going to type this right below here, relic ? Or A equals A. Okay, I'm going to put in front of this a hashtag, and that's a comment in MySQL. All right, so this is what the author has you type in or enter. And so you'll see that how does this get built in the application? Well, if this is my query, if I'm building this in the application itself, then what I have is I have this right here. I have username equals nothing and password equals nothing. And I'm going to take whatever you send me, whatever you submit in that website, and I'm going to put it right here and right here. So let's say that this is what you send. This is the value that you send for me as the username. I'm going to paste it right there. All right, what just happened? Let's get rid of this to make sure we don't have any conflicts. What just happened? Well, we have an error. If I try to execute this, I get no results. If we look down here, you can see there's an error because there's an extra single quote. Okay, single quotes have to match. We use them to wrap the values that we want to query off of. So now that I have an extra single quote, that throws off this SQL. So when you do that, and you find that the application generates an error, this is why. Because you're injecting into the programmer's SQL statement, and now you can manipulate it. So now that I've done that, I know I can manipulate it. How do we want to change our payload in order to actually do something? Well, in this case, what we can do is we can modify the logic. What if I said or 1 equals 1? Okay, so if we just look at this portion, I'm saying username equals relic or 1 equals 1. Well, logical or. Only one of these conditions has to be true. This is true. So no matter what value I provide here, this is always true. But if I try to run this, I still have an issue, right? There's still this extra quotation, single quote. So how do we get rid of that? Well, we already know the answer, and that's the comment. So if we inject a comment, now look, that comments out the rest of the code. We don't care about whatever else was in there. We now bypassed all the additional, in this case, this additional check on the password. If we execute this statement, we get every password. Okay, so more or less, this is what's happening. When you go through the lab and read through the chapter, this is what's happening. So again, don't worry, you don't have to be SQL experts. I'm not expecting anyone to write any SQL this semester. I just wanted to give you some insight looking at actual SQL so that you had a little better understanding of what's happening. It wasn't just simply I'm just typing in the commands as the book says. You know what's going on. If you want, inside your backtrack VM, this is just as native on my machine, but you can do the same thing in your backtrack VM. You can type in MySQL-u root-p. That'll prompt you for a password. For you guys, it is Tor, so it's the same credentials that you use to log into backtrack. For me, that's not correct. It's just actually my SQL-u root. I didn't set a password. And now you have a MySQL command line, and from here you can write queries. So I can say show databases, and it will show me all my databases. I can say show, if I want to use one table, or a database, I can say use DVWA, and I'm using that. Now I can say show tables. Okay, you can see there's one table. So I can drill in. I can say select star from users. Okay, and there's all that same information. So you can do the same thing. You can experiment with a database. You can get in there. You can query. You can write some queries. You don't need the GUI. It just makes it a little bit easier, especially for me recording. So, all right, that's MySQL. A little bit of SQL. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes now, and I want to show everybody the IA lab. If you've already been in the IA lab before, then just skip ahead about a minute or so. And there is some things that we're going to talk through the lab yet, and then I want to show or point some things out about the lab as well. So walk through getting into the IA lab. I've now created a VM for everyone. Backtrack 5R3, I have DVWA installed, and then there's a couple of other little things I've uploaded in there for later use. This is a nice option because all you need is a browser. Okay, these are not ready yet. Okay, I will send an additional email giving you instructions on how to get into the IA lab. So don't try to get in there yet. Don't send me any emails about, well, I need access now. I will provide you with an email that will get you into the lab here in just a small matter of time. So just be patient. I will contact you. We'll get you an email and let you know. Nice thing about this then, these machines, once you get into them, they will not be connected to the internet. There is no possible way they're getting out. So if you have a little bit of apprehension about it, feel free to use these machines to connect to the internet, I'm sorry, not to connect there, but use these machines so that you don't have to worry about getting out of the lab, right? You cannot get out to the internet. Once you get instructions, you'll be provided a page to log in. You'll get your account set up, and you'll log in. You'll see something similar to this. Here you see a bunch of machines. These are just things I have access to. You will have this, CIS 245 BT5R3. All right, you'll have some statuses here. You may have stopped, you may have partially stopped, you may have partially running, you may have running. There's not a whole lot you and I can do from here. We can start it, we can stop it, we can pause it, and we can get into it. So before you can interact with it, you need to make sure it's running. Okay, if it's not running, highlight the machine, click the green start button. Before you get to this point, you might have to download some plugins, so just go through that process and get those downloaded. Once it's running, you'll see that running status. Okay, so it says it's running, and I can't do that, so what that means is it just got out of sync, and I'll just reload the browser. If you hear kind of a whine in the background, my laptop, I'm recording this on a MacBook Air, and the machine's fan's just kicking in, so I'm not sitting in an industrial park anywhere, it's just the fan's starting to kick in. Alright, so okay, now you see it's only partially running. So if we go ahead and click the start button, that gets started. I'm going to pause the video for a second while that starts up, and then we'll pick back up. So